समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to a fresh new episode of Geopolitics with Swasti, where Swasti Rao, our consulting editor for international and strategic affairs, takes your questions, dear subscribers, on geopolitical developments around the world. Now, Swasti, first of all, welcome back to India. And we are again meeting after a long break. And a lot has happened geopolitically. There was Putin's visit, a lot of other things as well. But today, I would like to start with a question by our subscriber Prashant Singh, who has a very interesting question and wants you to shed some light on the deep militarization of China.
Okay.
In essence, what he asks is that what will its consequences be for India, especially in the light of the diplomatic show-off of China, where it showed off, the hydrogen bomb, the ICBM, and other achievements like the 6th generation fighter aircraft against the US. He then asks that, do you think that this is a direct threat to India?
Well, thank you, Devdatta. It's always good to be back for another GPS. And it's a good question because I think many Indians are under the impression, and rightfully so, because we have a border dispute with China and we have had active wars with China, that China's military modernization is a direct threat to India. See, China is already a direct threat to India, okay? And all these cutting-edge military transformations that you see happening in China are not only an added threat to India, but actually that is for the peer competitor that they only consider United States, okay? So that's more sort of directed to telling the world that they are going to become a world-class army, and that is a challenge that they pose to the United States directly. As far as India is concerned, they're already a threat to India, okay? But since you asked a question on deep militarization and capabilities, I think a couple of data points will help us answer. So for instance, if you look at China, its defense budget, because I think numbers are the best way to actually understand where a country's aspirations are going. So China's defense budget has gone up by 13-fold, which is 13 times in the last 30 years, which means that currently, for the current financial year, their defense budget is about $250 billion. And some accounts say that because the nature of the Chinese system is so opaque, so it is very likely that their defense budget is about $300 billion. And this budget is more than the defense budgets of India, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan put together. So there, and if I tell you what is India's defense budget for the current year, it is close to 78 to 80 billion. So you have 78 to 80 billion on the one hand and 300 billion on the other hand. So you can totally see that this difference is not merely linear, it is actually exponential. And this 250 officially, and according to some estimates, $300 billion is divided across the 5 branches of their armed forces, which is the PLA Army, PLA Navy, PLA Air Force, PLA Rocket Force, which is about their missiles, and the new vertical, which is the Information Support Force, okay, which has all got to do with cutting edge technology and the AI domain and cognitive warfare capabilities, etc. Now, so this is something that you need to keep in mind, okay, that when you talk about China's deep militarization now, and what this militarization is trying to achieve. So from Deng Xiaoping times, which is like, earlier when China first started to modernize its military and all that, from there, the focus was earlier on how do you solve these local wars, which are sprouting in China's border areas, okay? So from that, very, very localized worldview, now they have come to an aspiration of developing a world-class army. In the papers, they go into the details of what it means to really develop a world-class army, a world-class navy with blue water capabilities, etc. under Xi Jinping particularly, China has initiated two major reforms: organization and command and control, and service level force standardization and doctrinal revisions. And the other thing that you see under Xi Jinping is the increase in the joint exercises, because joint exercises has also been China's way of projecting its power. And so, just to give you an example, in 2015, the Chinese Navy participated in about 19 joint exercises. Okay, in less than a decade, this number has grown to about 34. Okay, and this is only going to grow. And when you look at the countries with whom China does these joint exercises, it poses a problem for India, because one of India's friends is featuring again and again as China's favored partner in their joint exercises, and which is Russia. So those are the ways in which we notice how the budget is growing, what are the different vectors along which these technologies are growing, and then who are the countries with whom China is doing these joint exercises. Now, key point here for everybody to understand is not just numbers and not just about what weapons are they developing. I think what you really need to understand, and we all need to understand, is that what is the trigger to China's evolution? The thing is that China has observed and learned from wars, not just its own wars, but the wars that have been fought by US everywhere. So in the 80s and 90s, it took massive lessons from Vietnam War, from the Gulf War. In 2024 National Party Congress, something I'm just going to mention two statements, and these two statements are going to tell you where they are headed. So in the 2024 National Party Congress, the premier said two things. Okay, first was that China is going to establish a framework of modern military theories with Chinese characteristics, right? Which means that this is a direct challenge to the Western sort of warfare and the Western ideas of warfare. And the second was that he said that China is going to put emphasis on network information systems, which relate to the importance of AI and artificial learning and artificial intelligence, that mandates a comprehensive integration of information technology, cyber, space and autonomous platforms into PLA operations. And there is focus on how to develop algorithmic warfare, network centric warfare. And from India's perspective, these are not empty terms, because what you saw in Operation Sindoor was the manifestation of the China-Pakistan synergy in multi-domain operations and network-centric warfare, which did become a problem for India. And that is why the whole world was interested in seeing how the Chinese missiles have been battle-tested and how are they performing, because this was one of the very few manifestations of what China is capable of doing. And by the way, after Operation Sindoor, China has already learned and incorporated the lessons from how the PL-15 missiles had performed. With India, frankly, if you ask me, it is the network-centric capabilities. It is the fact that China has about 1,000 satellites in space and we don't have so many. Those are kind of things, that are more, and also the Chinese, a very, very important component that India is really getting affected by is, the Chinese cyber threat and the Chinese capabilities of destroying and damaging critical infrastructure, right? So those are areas that are a threat to us today. Even if you don't look at the larger power projection, which is not directed to India, in the Chinese mind, their peer competitor is the United States.
So following on similar lines, Swasti, Georges Sira has a question where he says that, so where are the Chinese weapons being battle tested? Because there was Operation Sindoor, but are there any other places in the world, and who helps China in doing the testing?
Okay, great question, because one of the biggest, shortcomings of the Chinese weapons so far is always the same thing, which is the Chinese weapons are not battle tested. And why we say that is because China is number one weapon supplier to both Pakistan and Bangladesh, okay, which is a problem for India because it disturbs the balance of power and the status quo in the Indian subcontinent. But as far as the battle testing part is concerned, okay, two places where they have got battle tested, very, very clearly. One against India in Operation Sindoor, and that is I keep referring to as the key takeaway for the Chinese and for the Western observers, because this was the first ever time a full-fledged BVR battle was being played out between two peers, which is India and Pakistan, right? So against India in Operation Sindoor. And second is the Chinese drones that are battle tested against Houthis in Yemen. And who does that? So China doesn't play a military role there. These Chinese drones are bought by Emiratis, and these Chinese drones are given to Sudanese militias to basically fight against the Houthis on the behalf of Emiratis, because the Emiratis are supporting the Sudanese militia in exchange, in Sudan, in exchange of their fight against the Houthis using the Chinese drones. So that is the second place where the Chinese weapons get battle tested. And third is not so much of battle testing, but more of subsystem integration that I keep giving you examples of, where I keep telling you that, for example, now we are entering an era where the Chinese and Pakistanis co-designed and co-produced fighter jets are being deployed with Turkish missiles and sold to third countries like Azerbaijan and so on. So subsystem integration is another area where the Chinese military modernization is heading to, which is a cost effective and a more, let's say, a modular sort of solution, that the same subsystem can be integrated on different kind of weapons and can be sold at third countries at a much cheaper price in coordination with other partners, right? So that's called the subsystem integration. Okay, so these are the three things that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about where the Chinese weapons are getting battle tested.
Especially from China, we move on to Russia, and President Putin was here in India a few days ago. Lots of questions on that. I'll just club all of them together. Rohit Singh wants to know why the visit was strategically important, and others have questions on basically what were the key takeaways from the visit, although we know that no specific defense deals were signed.
That's right. Okay. Now, well, much has been said and written about President Putin's visit to India. I mean, I'll try to be succinct, and I'll try to tell you the key takeaways. Now, there is no doubt about the fact that Russia-India relationship remains to be stable and is also evolving. So it is not sort of fixated in time, and it has shown the resilience to evolve. So that's there. It is a historical partnership, no doubt about it. And I think because of all this, there were major expectations on both sides, and especially on the Indian side, because we know how the media had been reporting it, about new deals to be signed, or at least new announcements to be made, even if the deals are not to be signed. Now, quickly, we did not see any new deals coming up. At least in the area of defense, we did not even see them getting announced. Now, does that mean that Russia is no longer relevant for India? Now, that would be a very wrong way to look at it, because see, Russia is still responsible for about 36% of India's weapons imports. Okay, now large part of that is basically to do with legacy platforms. So, for example, if we want to upgrade our Sukhoi MKI-30 fleet, we are dependent on Russia because the IP is with Russia. And I know that the upgrade for the Sukhoi fleet has been cleared by the cabinet committee. Okay, so that approval has come. Similarly, if we want to acquire more missiles for the S-400s, and that clearance has also come. So we will eventually do that. There is of course a BrahMos sort of co-production facility. So all those things are there in place. But having said that, as far as new acquisitions are concerned, let's talk about new big ticket announcements, and the most, I would say, discussed was the Sukhoi 57 fifth generation aircraft. And I had gone on record telling several times that Indian Air Force had seen it earlier and they did not like what they saw. And I was always of the opinion that India would not really go for the Sukhoi 57 joint production, despite whatever is Russia is saying, because it is not as battle tested. So new acquisitions do not seem to be on the horizon. We might want to get more S-400 squadrons. We keep talking about that, but the decision on that would be taken based on when is Russia able to give us the remaining 2 squadrons of S-400, because our initial order was for 5 squadrons. We've only received 3, and the 2 are now being promised to us towards 26 and 27. All of that is contingent upon when the war in Ukraine will end, so that Russia is able to regain its export base. Because before the war in Ukraine, Russia was exporting weapons to more than 30 countries. Now it has fallen to about 12 countries. And all of Russia's defense production that you keep hearing about is completely focused on the war in Ukraine. So for India-Russia defense relations to sort of come back on track, right, the war has to end, and end in a way which is favorable to Russia, so that Western sanctions can be lifted. And that brings us to the third level of this complication, which is that India-Russia defense relationship is also, sort of diminishing in, so to say, when you compare it with how it's growing with other partners, because of, the presence of Chinese chips and, systems and information systems and technology, etc., that we still do not have a complete picture of. While that did not happen, but one of the most important key takeaways has been the RELOS. And RELOS is the Reciprocal Exchange Logistics Agreement that India and Russia had signed sort of many years ago. I mean, they finalized many years ago, but just before Putin landed in India, the Russian Duma, which is the Russian parliament, ratified it. So it came into effect. Now, according to this, India gets sort of access to several facilities, naval facilities, across different port locations. Now, having said that, there are different connectivity projects between India and Russia. They were discussed, like India's investment in Russian, Far East, and also India-Russia connectivity project between Chennai and Vladivostok. And I've done a worldview on that. And actually, the chairman of the Russian Arctic Council is the one who is the guest. So please refer to that, and please see that. I'm posting the link in the description box. But the point is that all this connectivity has to really translate into India-Russia trade imbalance getting rectified, because even though the trade is now close to $70 billion, which was before the war was just $10 billion, all of that is Russia's trade surplus because of the oil imports. Okay, so 65 billion or close to that is the amount that we import from Russia. On the contrary, we are not able to export much to Russia. So we have to rectify the trade balance, and that is the real challenge. Okay. Apart from that, there were some mobility agreements and all that. So I think the key takeaway remains that India-Russia relationship will see not as much development in the defense sector, which is contingent upon when the war in Ukraine ends and when the Western sanctions are lifted in order for that to function properly and smoothly. But on the other hand, you do see that there has been resilience to sort of evolve to other sectors, and the energy sector has become very important, and similarly the connectivity sector as well.
Since we just discussed about Russia and the Arctic, there's a question by Navneet Rohela. I'll just add it here. That it has been reported that Russia is inviting India to participate in the Arctic navigation and cooperation. However, the Western Bloc has expressed reservations about such engagement. Do you then think that the Russian offer to India could create friction with the West?
Now, that's an interesting question, because first you should see on the map where the Arctic is, and then you should see who are the stakeholders there. So in the stakeholders, you see the United States, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Russia, Greenland and Denmark, Finland and Canada. And with the exception of Russia, you can see that all the others, at least so far, okay, have been strategically sort of coordinated. Okay, so your question is that will India's convergence, or will India's coordination or deepening of Arctic outreach with the West come in the way of India's outreach with Russia, and vice versa, right? Now, couple of things here. See, when you look at it from India's perspective, India has officially maintained a policy of multi-alignment, like India always does. India has been a bit of a late entrant into the Arctic, actively speaking, because of course we were always, we were original signatories to the Svalbard Treaty, many years ago. We also set up our first station, okay, for scientific exploration, Himadri, in 2008. But the first Arctic policy did not come before 2022. Okay, and that Arctic policy, although it talks about a larger role than merely scientific collaboration and scientific exploration, etc., because of obvious reasons that the ice is melting and so much is getting unearthed. Now, for obvious reasons, it makes sense, because the ice is melting and so much is getting unearthed now. But at the same time, remember that India is not really looking at a larger strategic game right away. We talk about that. We talk about connectivity projects. When you see, in fact, just Prime Minister Modi has really sort of added a lot of substance to India's outreach with the, in the Arctic with the Nordic Council countries. Okay, so Prime Minister Modi has been going to the Nordic 5 countries and talking about, what India can do there, etc. But having said that, if you look at the strategy that came in 2022, you see that it is still relegated to not playing a bigger strategic role. And in fact, most of the recommendations by people who work on this region would say that India needs to develop the strategic vertical also in order to play the bigger game there. In fact, Arctic, as the ice melts, is going to become another arena of great power contestation, okay, for obvious reasons. I told you about the Northern Sea route and all that. So, so far, I don't think that India's engagement is deep enough to cause a rift, but you are right in your observation that it will not be such an easy multi-alignment, because it will be with the West on the other hand and with Russia on the other hand. I think India is going to face the same kind of, challenges or test of its multi-alignment. And like I always say that India's multi-alignment is not an equal distribution, so India would prioritize as and when the need would be. But right now we are not that deeply entrenched into the Arctic, but we want to be there because China is there big time, and we would like to balance the outreach of China there in the region.
Moving on to the Middle East, Swasti, there's a question by Georges Sira who wants to know the reasons behind tensions flaring up in Lebanon again and what is the connection of this with Hezbollah. He further asks that has Israel not destroyed all proxies, and if not, then how long will Israel take, and what is the role of states like Jordan where Pakistan recently had a defense cooperation with. In his words, he says then that the region seems like a khichdi, so he would like for you to explain.
Well, I totally agree with you, Mr. Sira, that the region is indeed a khichdi, and it is, I think, to my mind, one of the most complex regions to understand. I think all regions are complex, but truly, Middle East is one region which is very complex to understand. The first thing about Middle East is the minute I say look at this region, please look at the map. So if you look at the map and see where is Lebanon, where is Syria, and where is Iraq, and where is Israel, you will see how close these regions are and why they matter so much to Israel. Now, long story short, the first thing is that the current tensions are all coming from Israel's massive and I would say, parallel campaigns against weakening and decapacitating the proxies, okay? Particularly the three main proxies by Iran, the Hezbollah, Hamas and Houthis. And also the others, the floating militias that are there in like big numbers in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere. So this comes in that context that Israel is after decapacitating these proxies, and Israel is not going to stop before they reach a particular level of Israel say obliterating them completely. I don't think that is possible, but whatever level Bibi Netanyahu has in mind. I've also gone in several times on record saying that for Bibi's political career, it is very important that he continues with some kind of a war because, the day the war ends, there are so many charges against him in his own country by his own courts that, his political career would be in trouble. Now, coming back to this very interesting question, Lebanon, Syria and Iraq. These three specifically, the thing you have to understand is that they do not have monopoly, okay? These three countries do not have monopoly of the use of force, over their territory, which means that they do not control, these countries particularly, they don't control all of their territory. And as a result, Israel is the one that controls part of the territory, and then Turkey is another actor that controls part of some territory. And then there are actors like, Saudi Arabia and UAE that keep playing their own little games by supporting different proxies. But if there are two actors that are very unabashed in controlling parts of these territories, is on the one hand is Israel, on the other hand is Turkey. And I'll tell you why. Now, just to give you a little glimpse of just how much Israel controls the narrative in this region, when HTS, Al-Shara, when he entered Damascus a year ago, it's been a 1 year of, his taking over Damascus and the fall of Assad, Israel started bombing all military infrastructure in Syria, okay? And they warned Al-Shara. So, for example, when that happened, so they warned Al-Shara, they warned Damascus that they are not going to tolerate any Syrian military presence south of Damascus. So look at Syria. South of Syria is under Israeli control de facto, along with Golan Heights, of course, and north of Syria, especially the northwestern region around Idlib, is all under Turkish control. Okay, that's where you have the Kurdish fighters, right? These countries do not really control all of their territory. Okay, now coming to Lebanon. Now, you are right in your reading that they had signed like a truce in November of 2024, and it has been under a lot of stress lately because Israel has been bombing facilities in south of Lebanon because they say that Lebanon, that is where the Hezbollah is. And Lebanon has said that Israel has killed about 83 civilians. Israel says that we have killed Hezbollah that are fighting there, and we are not going to stop because our mission is to obliterate all these proxies. And it is true that one of the ways in which these proxies operate is that they are spread over all these regions. And of course, Hezbollah has been having one of the most steady presence in Lebanon. And people in Lebanon fear that there could be a full-fledged campaign, like a full-fledged military campaign that could spread over other parts of, Lebanon. Now, Lebanon knows the danger. So, Lebanon has said that, okay, we are going to disarm Hezbollah. But it is not so easy to disarm Hezbollah. Why? Because there is a condition. Hezbollah says that we are not going to disarm, and this is not just about Hezbollah, it's the same for Hamas also. Whenever it comes to complete obliteration of these proxies, they say, all right, we will take major steps to disarm these groupings as you want if you agree to a Palestinian state. And because Israel will not agree to a Palestinian state is why this becomes like a what came first, the chicken or the egg. Okay, so this has become a that kind of a problem which does not really have a quick and easy resolution, and that also shows the limits of Donald Trump's aspirations to really have an Abraham Accords 2.0, because the first Abraham Accords that he concluded in 2020 was based on a particular kind of a status quo, a power arrangement where Israel's power was also relegated to certain confines. All of that has changed after Hamas's attack of 2023, after which Israel has taken a completely different view of going all out against Hezbollah, Hamas and Houthis, and also Iran. In fact, what I've been saying is that a next round of Iran-Israel confrontation will come in a few months, and then we will also see more violence in Iraq. So under new circumstances where Israel has gained so much prominence, okay, the US has also gone to the extent of supporting, Israel. It deployed its B-2 bombers against Iran. Under these changed circumstances, the countries in the region are not willing to agree to an Abraham Accords 2.0, which is normalization with Israel, unless and until Israel agrees for a new Palestinian state.
And Swasti, the other part of this on what is the role of states like Jordan in the whole...
Oh, yeah. So Jordan was in news recently because Jordan recently struck a defense cooperation agreement with Pakistan. And it was interesting because Azerbaijani defense industry representatives were sitting there. In fact, everybody took note of that. Now, before I tell you why Pakistan and Jordan have struck this agreement, I'll tell you a little bit about Jordan also. So Jordan is interesting. Jordan is also very close to the region. Again, please refer to the map. The thing with Jordan is that although Israel doesn't really control its territory, like it does for Syria or like it does for Iraq and like it does for Lebanon, but Jordan provided a kind of an enabling role to Israel against Iran. Now, why they do it, and I think this is important to understand, because 80% of the population is Palestinian, origin, it is a constant threat to Jordan's monarchy. Okay, so what the Jordan monarchy does, the capital, Amman, so what they do is that they work with Israel to maintain the hold of the monarchy over the population, which is largely Palestine. And they are hugely critical of what Israel is doing to Gaza and elsewhere, okay? That's one part, why Israel has influence in Jordan, okay? Even though it does not really control it in the same way it does for, Syria, Iraq and Lebanon. The second is that Jordan has a massive dependence for water on Israel, okay? So the water supply to Jordan is also coming, from Israel, and they are massively dependent. Israel knows very well how to use these two dependencies and to play a game. When Pakistan strikes a defense cooperation, agreement with Jordan, this is nothing as such new. They obviously, Pakistan and Jordan have very cordial ties because, Muslim nations, etc. But Jordan is not a part of the Three Brothers Alliance technically, which means that Jordan is not as close to Pakistan as Pakistan, Turkey and Azerbaijan are to each other. So this particular development in the region, shows Pakistan's rising profile, diplomatic and military profile in the Middle East. It has always been there. It's just that after Operation Sindhu, we have started to talk more about it. So there has been a kind of an enhancement, there. So that is the first reflection. The second is that it is also Jordan trying to hedge its bets because of its dependence that I just told you about, this twin dependence that they have on Israel. So it's Jordan also, sort of hedging their bets and perhaps trying to reach out to the other side of the Muslim, nations. From our perspective, this is relevant because it shows that there is a Pakistan factor there, which is sort of, on an upward trajectory.
Along the same lines, since we are discussing the rise of Pakistan, Hafiz Ahad Noor has a question where he wants you to discuss more on this increasing influence of Pakistan in the Middle East and how it will affect this region, and then analyze Turkey's growing influence in the subcontinent and how it will affect India's relationship with Turkey.
Now, India's relationship with Turkey. Okay, now a very interesting question. Now, let's answer the first part and then let's come to the second part. Now, the first part, we are already discussing it, right? We are already discussing that one of the ways to interpret Pakistan-Jordan alliance with Azerbaijanis looking over is also to basically, it reflects that Pakistan's diplomatic profile and military profile in the region has been on an upward trajectory. Not to say that it was never there, it was always there, but it has been on an upward trajectory. With US's role being rather uncertain in the region, now the US's national security strategy under Donald Trump, which has been unveiled, only last week, says that US is going to decrease its presence from the CENTCOM and focus more on the Western Hemisphere. But if you look at the US's actions, right, it is way more entrenched today in the Middle Eastern politics than it ever was, not just politics, but also Middle East wars, okay? Because Donald Trump became the first ever president of the United States to really arm Israel. I mean, to give active military support to Israel against Iran. No US president has ever done that in the history of the United States. So when I look at the strategy documents, it says we want to focus on Western Hemisphere, but if you look at the actions, you see US is really entrenched there. So my opinion is that it is uncertain. And it also creates more room for Pakistan to expand its diplomatic profile. It is again not something which is new. It is just that after Operation Sindoor, we have somewhere woken up to this reality and we are discussing this more in our strategic discussions. Otherwise, we never really discussed the real value or the real impact factor of the three brother alliance between Turkey, Azerbaijan and Pakistan. The fact that Pakistan's engineers, 150 Pakistani engineers are developing the Turkish fifth generation project, or for example, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia recently struck a defense cooperation. It may not mean anything on the ground as such in the near future, but the fact that a power like Saudi Arabia, which is the biggest economy and the most prominent GCC members, strikes a deal with Pakistan, also shows that they are uncertain about US's role, So whether directly or indirectly, it has benefited Pakistan, right? Then we just mentioned the Pakistan-Jordan Defense Cooperation Agreement with the Azerbaijani smiling over it and endorsing it. Not just that, the Pakistan Emiratis, they are also pretty close. The Pakistan and Qataris are very close. In fact, most of the pilots that fly the Qatari civilian and military jets that include the Rafales are Pakistani. Okay, so what you see is that, and of course, I did mention the three brother alliance, so I know the Pakistani-Turkish synergy is already there. And then when you take all of this in toto, you realize that what Pakistan has been able to do in the last 1 decade or a decade and a half, that India should have studied more analytically and more objectively, is that Pakistan has become a revolving door of human intelligence, human resource, and military tech innovation, especially subsystems integration between China, Turkey, through Turkey, the Western systems, okay, and then the Middle Eastern theater, and so on. So Pakistan's, let's say, evolution, okay, as a revolving door of these components, I just mentioned intelligence, resource, and military tech innovation, subsystem integration. I gave you so many examples of how Pakistani, Chinese co-produced jets are being sold to other parts of the world. That is something that India should have studied more objectively. And that is a part of missing conversation. That has been a part of conversation which has been missing, that I finally now see happening more in Indian strategic discussions about how these relationships are not that of buying and selling, right? This is more of synergy and complementarity, right? So that is about Pakistan's rise and growth. I agree with it. Whether it poses a direct threat to India in terms of whether the GCC countries with whom India also has a very deep relationship are going to be up in arms against India, no. But as far as Pakistan's diplomatic rise is concerned, it is undoubtedly true. Now, there was also a related question on how it impacts India-Turkey relations.
Yes.
Of course, India and Turkey do not have cordial relations because of Turkey's active support to Pakistan against India in Operation Sindoor, just pretty much like China. In fact, it took us in Operation Sindoor to really start talking about what is the complementarity between Pakistan and Turkey, right? It is not simply Turkey selling weapons to Pakistan. It is about Turkey also testing its weapons against India, Turkey, Pakistan, China, Azerbaijan involved in the subsystem integration, which is my favorite phrase these days. But more than that, I think when I look at Turkey, it is undoubtedly one of the one of the latest superpowers, there is no doubt about. When you look at its military industrial complex, when you look at its shipbuilding capabilities, there is a reason why Turkish Navy and Turkish warships have been visiting Sri Lanka 6 times in 1 year. So what I'm saying is that there is no doubt about the fact that they have a massive, construction capabilities. They have massive shipbuilding capabilities, not as formidable as Italy or somewhere, but they're growing very fast, okay, and a massive military industrial complex, okay, which is very successful as integrating these systems, in the manner in which I'm telling. And not many people realize that it's not just China that does reverse engineering, Turkey also does reverse engineering. Now, from India's perspective, of course, when we see that our arch rival is supported by these powers, it creates problem for us. When I look at Turkey, I see that Turkey is very successful at compartmentalizing it for its foreign policy. So there are areas where Turkey and Russia also cooperate, by the way. So in Russia-Ukraine war, Turkey is supporting Ukraine. But there are other parts where Turkey and Russia also cooperate. So while Turkey has been successful in compartmentalizing its foreign policy for many, many players in the world, I do not see that compartmentalization working with India. So with India, it's become a very black or a white situation. If you ask me, it's not a great strategy because we would not want Pakistan to be supported by, robust military industrial powers, especially the upcoming ones such as Turkey. So I think India and Turkey should also work out some kind of a compartmentalized foreign policy, collaborations. Our major problem is Turkey's support to Pakistan on the matter of Kashmir, right? But it's not just limited to that. It is also manifesting in ways that are detrimental to India's national security today.
With that, Swasti, we come to an end of this episode. It has been an extremely insightful conversation, and we look forward to your questions for next week. Thank you.